How does a woman who liberated the female form from the corset find her name in the declassified files of the Third Reich, assigned the codename Westminster? What dark pact allowed her to walk free from a collaborator's prison cell with a single, unverified phone call, while others, who had done far less, faced public humiliation and the firing squad? The story of Gabrielle Bonheur Coco Chanel is not a fairy tale of rags to riches. It is a testament, written in silk and tweed, to the idea that genius and monstrosity can inhabit the same soul, that the hands that design a revolution can also sign a pact with the devil. Her life was not a pursuit of beauty, but a relentless, terrifying quest for power, where every stitch was a strategy, every lover a stepping stone, and every choice a move in a game only she seemed to understand. To unravel her legend is to pull a thread that threatens to unravel the very fabric of 20th century culture, revealing the dark seams holding together an empire of elegance. This is the story of a queen who built her throne on secrets, and a traitor who hid her crimes in plain sight, draped in the folds of the most beautiful clothes the world had ever seen. The journey begins not in a glittering Parisian salon, but in the cold, unforgiving corridors of an orphanage in Aubezine, a place of stone floors and stark discipline. It was here, abandoned by her father, a nomadic street vendor, that Gabrielle Chanel died and Coco was forged. The stark black and white of the nuns' habits, the clean, austere lines of the convent, the interlocking seas of the stained glass windows, these were not memories of a sad childhood. They were the raw materials for a future aesthetic. She learned early that survival was a weapon, and that sentiment was a weakness the world would exploit without mercy. Poverty was not a condition to be endured, but an enemy to be annihilated. The nuns of the Congregation of the Sacred Heart of Mary taught her to sew. It was a practical skill for a poor girl, a path to a respectable, if meager, existence as a seamstress. But in Gabrielle's hands, the needle was not a tool of humble craft. It became a scalpel to dissect society and a scepter to command it. She left the orphanage at 18, a young woman armed with a cutting glare, an iron will, and a profound contempt for the world that had discarded her. Her first forays into society were not as a designer, but as a performer, a poseuse, in the provincial music halls of Moulins, singing forgettable songs to rooms full of drunken soldiers. It was there she acquired her nickname, Coco, either from a song she sang, or as a coded term for a kept woman, a cocotte. She embraced it. Gabrielle was the orphan. Coco would be the invention, a creature of pure will, untethered to a past she was determined to erase. Her stage was small, but her ambition was boundless. She understood that her voice would not make her famous, but her allure could make her powerful. She scanned the audience not for admirers, but for patrons, for exits from the suffocating mediocrity of her life. Her gaze fell upon Etienne Balsan, a wealthy textile heir and ex-cavalry officer. He was her first true target. She became his mistress, an ornament at his country estate, Royalieu. For another woman this might have been the pinnacle of success. For Coco it was merely an apprenticeship. She observed the lives of the rich with the detached curiosity of an anthropologist studying a strange tribe. She saw their women trussed up in corsets, weighed down by feathers and frills, and felt nothing but disdain. She saw their men, confident, powerful, holding all the cards, and felt a surge of cold fury. At Balsan's estate, she learned to ride horses, not as a delicate lady, but astride like a man, a scandalous act that was a declaration of intent. She borrowed his clothes, adapting his tweed jackets, his polo shirts, his neckties for her own slender frame. This was not a fashion statement, it was an appropriation of power. She was stripping masculinity of its authority and redesigning it for herself. While other courtesans of the Belle Époque sought to captivate men with their hyper-feminine fragility, Chanel sought to challenge them by adopting their own language of comfort, freedom, and control. It was at Royalieu that she met the love of her life, or rather, the great investment of her life. Arthur Boy Capel, a wealthy English industrialist and polo player. He was richer, more ambitious, and more worldly than Balsam. Chanel executed her transition with surgical precision, leaving Balsam for Capel, securing his financial backing to open her first shop. It was a hat shop, a modest beginning, but it was a foothold. With Capel's money, she established her first true beachhead at 21 Rue Cambon in Paris in 1910. Her hats were stark, simple, and elegant, a radical departure from the ornate monstrosities of the era. They sold. She was no longer a kept woman, she was a businesswoman. The war, when it came in 1914, was a disaster for Europe, but a spectacular opportunity for Chanel. While men died in the trenches, she opened a boutique in the seaside resort of Deauville, catering to wealthy women displaced by the conflict. Wartime shortages of traditional fabrics led her to a revolutionary material, jersey, a humble knit previously used for men's underwear. She crafted simple, comfortable, and chic dresses from it. She was selling not just clothes, but a new way of life for women. Freedom from the corset was freedom of movement, a symbol of a new social reality. She was building an empire while others were building barricades, but in the end, she had to choose which side to fight on, and she chose the side of the winners, whoever they were. Her success was built on an almost psychic understanding of the zeitgeist. She didn't follow trends, she dictated them, anticipating the needs of a world in upheaval. Her personal life was a series of calculated transactions. Boy Capel was the great love, the one who believed in her genius, but his tragic death in a car accident in 1919 did not break her. It hardened her. Grief was a luxury she could not afford. She channeled her sorrow into work, a furious, relentless drive that would propel her to global stardom. Her salon on Rue Cambon became the epicenter of modernism, a magnet not only for the fashionable and the artistic, Picasso, Cocteau, Stravinsky, but also for the most powerful politicians in Europe, men whose conversations grew more and more alarming as the golden age of the 20s began to tarnish. What do you think drove her more, the burning desire to create or the cold-blooded need to conquer? Let us know in the comments below what you believe was the true engine of her ambition. The air in her salon, thick with the scent of expensive perfume and Cuban cigars, was also thick with secrets. As she measured a client for a suit, she was also measuring the political temperature of a continent sliding toward abyss. Her affair with the Russian Grand Duke Dmitry Pavlovich, a refugee from the Bolshevik Revolution, was more than a romance. It was a strategic alliance. He was penniless royalty, but he had connections. Through him, she met Ernest Beau, a perfumer to the former Russian court, a man who would help her create her ultimate weapon. She wanted a perfume that was not a demure floral scent, but something bold, complex, and artificial, the scent of the modern woman. "A woman's perfume," she commanded, "with the scent of a woman." Beau presented her with a series of samples. She chose the 5th vial. Chanel No. 5 was born. Its success was not accidental. It was the result of a brilliant and ruthless marketing campaign. She didn't just sell it, she weaponized it, giving bottles to her most influential friends, creating an aura of exclusive desire before it ever hit the shelves. The simple, almost medicinal bottle was a stroke of genius, a rejection of the ornate crystal flacons of the era. It was a statement of modernist purity, a laboratory vessel for a scent that would conquer the world. But to launch it globally, she needed more capital than even she possessed. This led her to the Wertheimer brothers, Pierre and Paul, Jewish entrepreneurs who owned the bourgeois cosmetics empire. In 1924, they struck a deal creating Le Parfum Chanel. They would finance the production and distribution. In return, they would take 70% of the profits. Chanel would receive a mere 10%. It seemed like a bad deal, but she was desperate. It was a contract she would come to despise, a pact that would fuel a lifelong vendetta, a hatred that would eventually lead her down the darkest of paths. She believed she had been cheated, and for Coco Chanel there was no greater sin. The scent of success was intoxicating, but for her it was forever tainted by the scent of a grudge. Her social ascent continued its dizzying climb. Through the Grand Duke, she was introduced to the highest echelons of European society. In Monte Carlo, she met the richest man in Britain, Hugh Grosvenor, the second Duke of Westminster. Their affair lasted a decade. It was a period of unimaginable luxury. He showered her with jewels, property, and art. They sailed the Mediterranean on his yachts, hunted on his vast Scottish estates. He was her entry into the very heart of the British aristocracy, a world of inherited power and casual bigotry. It was in this circle that she met Winston Churchill. They became friends, bonding over a shared love of fine brandy and sharp conversation. She found him brilliant, a formidable force. But the Duke's circle was also deeply infected with a strain of virulent anti-Semitism and a growing admiration for the new order rising in Germany and Italy. They saw Adolf Hitler not as a threat, but as a bulwark against communism, a strong leader who could restore discipline to a decadent Europe. Chanel, the outsider, the orphan who had fought her way into the inner sanctum, listened. She absorbed the casual prejudices, the elitist disdain for democracy, the belief that a powerful few should rule the masses. It was an ideology that resonated with her own autocratic nature. She was not a political philosopher, but she was a pragmatist. She aligned herself with power wherever she found it. She learned that to control the world, you first had to dress it, then perfume it, and finally befriend its kings. This was the 1930s, a decade of glamour and dread. While she was designing tweed suits inspired by the Duke's hunting jackets, the world was rearming. While she was hosting lavish parties, democracies were crumbling. The dazzling brilliance of the Jazz Age was fading, giving way to the long, sharp shadows of an approaching war. The conversations in her powerful circle were no longer just about horses and yachts. They were about appeasement, about alliances, about the inevitability of conflict. For a woman whose entire existence was predicated on control, the looming chaos was both a threat and a tantalizing opportunity. Her connections to the highest levels of British power, forged in an era of peace and luxury, would soon become her most valuable and most dangerous assets in a world about to be consumed by fire. The fire came on September 1st, 1939. As German tanks rolled into Poland, plunging Europe into darkness, Coco Chanel made a decision of chilling finality. She summoned the 4,000 women who worked for her, the seamstresses, the fitters, the salesgirls who were the lifeblood of her empire, and she fired them all. She closed the doors of her couture house on Rue Cambon, leaving only the ground-floor boutique open to sell perfume and accessories. Her stated reason was stark and dramatic. This is no time for fashion. To the world, it sounded like a grand, patriotic gesture, a recognition that in a time of war, frivolity must cease. But was it? Or was it a calculated act of personal vengeance? Many of her workers had recently participated in a general strike, demanding better wages and working conditions, a union. Chanel, the absolute monarch of her domain, was enraged by their audacity. The war provided the perfect excuse to punish them, to reassert her total control. She retreated from the world of couture, but not from the heart of the conflict. She moved into a lavish suite at the Hotel Ritz, Paris. As the German army marched into Paris in June 1940, the Ritz became their de facto headquarters. Hermann Göring, the head of the Luftwaffe, occupied the imperial suite. The hotel's opulent bars and restaurants echoed with the guttural sounds of German commands and the clinking glasses of victorious officers. And in the midst of it all, Coco Chanel lived, worked, and loved. She was not hiding, she was positioning herself. She had chosen her side, the side of the survivors, the winners, the new masters of Paris. Her survival strategy soon took a very personal form. She began a love affair with Baron Hans Günther von Dinklage, a handsome, sophisticated German diplomat she called Spatz. But Dinklage was much more than a diplomat. He was a professional intelligence officer, a senior operative in the Abwehr, the German military intelligence service. He was a master spy, fluent in French and English, with a network of contacts that reached into the highest levels of European society. Their relationship was not a simple wartime romance. It was a transaction. He provided her with protection, with access to the luxuries, fine food, coal for heating, a car that had vanished for ordinary Parisians. And what did she provide him? Information, connections, and ultimately, her allegiance. The exact moment of her recruitment is lost to the fog of war, shrouded in the deliberate destruction of records and the lies of survivors. But the evidence, unearthed decades later, is irrefutable. Chanel was recruited by the Abwehr. She was given an agent number, F7124. Her missions were coordinated through a trusted subordinate of Heinrich Himmler. Why did she do it? Was it ideology? Had the anti-Semitic poison she absorbed in Britain convinced her that the Nazis were Europe's salvation? Was it pure opportunism? A cold calculation that a German victory was inevitable and it was better to be with the occupiers than against them? Or was it something more personal, a weapon in her private war against the Wertheimer brothers, a chance to use the power of the Reich to reclaim the perfume fortune she felt was stolen from her? The truth, most likely, is a toxic cocktail of all three. She was no longer just a designer. She was a collaborator. The woman who had built an empire on the idea of modern freedom had enlisted in the service of tyranny. Her suite at the Ritz had become her command center, a listening post in the heart of occupied Paris, where she entertained German officers and plotted her next move, a move that would take her from the world of fashion into the deadly, shadowy world of international espionage. Her new identity was now official, recorded in the meticulous, chillingly bureaucratic files of German intelligence. Agent F7124. To give her an operational name, her Abwehr handlers chose a word that was a direct link to her past, a key to her value. They called her Westminster. It was a reminder of her decade with the Duke, of her intimate access to the British ruling class, of her friendship with the one man the Third Reich both feared and, in some strange way, admired, Winston Churchill. Her transformation from couturier to spy was complete. Her primary handler, Baron von Dinklage, worked under the direction of General Walter Schellenberg, the head of foreign intelligence for the Sicherheitsdienst, or SD, a man who answered directly to Heinrich Himmler. Chanel was not a low-level informant. She was a high-value asset, intended for operations at the highest level. Her moment came in late 1943. The tide of the war was turning against Germany. The Eastern Front was a bloody stalemate, and the threat of an Allied invasion in the West was growing every day. In the desperate calculus of the Nazi High Command, an idea began to form, a separate peace with Britain. If they could persuade the British to exit the war, Germany could move all its forces to the east to crush the Soviet Union. It was a long shot, but they had an asset they believed could open a secret channel to the top. Agent Westminster. The plan was given a code name as elegant and deceptive as the agent herself. Operation Model Hut or Fashion Hat. The mission was for Chanel to travel to Madrid, a neutral city teeming with spies from all sides. There, she was to meet with the British ambassador Sir Samuel Hoare, whom she knew socially. Through Hoare, she was to pass a message to her old friend Churchill. The message was simple. High-ranking officials in the SS were willing to negotiate a peace that would leave Britain's empire intact in exchange for a free hand for Germany in Eastern Europe. It was a mission that, if successful, could have changed the course of history. Chanel embraced the role. Accompanied by her handler, she traveled to Madrid. She carried with her a letter intended to prove her bona fides, a personal note for Churchill. The operation was a masterpiece of cynical calculation, using a fashion icon as a vector for Nazi diplomacy. She met with Hoare at the British Embassy, leveraging her fame and her past connections to gain an audience. She spoke of her concern for the future of Europe, of her friendship with Churchill, of her belief that the war against the Bolshevik hordes was the only one that mattered. But Operation Modelhood was doomed from the start. Churchill, by then, was a steadfast ally of the United States and the Soviet Union, utterly committed to Germany's unconditional surrender. Even if the message had reached him, he would have rejected it outright. Furthermore, British intelligence was already aware of the German peace feelers and saw them as a clumsy attempt to sow discord among the Allies. Chanel's mission was not just a failure, it was a farce. She returned to Paris empty-handed. She had played her most important card and lost. The affair exposed the naivete behind her ruthless ambition. She, who was a master of her own world, was a mere pawn in the great game of nations. Yet the failure of the mission did not diminish her guilt. The documents remain. The plan was real. She had actively worked to broker a deal that would have betrayed the alliances fighting to liberate her own country. Does an act of treason become less severe simply because it fails? Or does the intention itself carry the full weight of the crime? As she settled back into her suite at the Ritz, her grand geopolitical gambit may have been over, but her personal war, a war fueled by greed and decades of resentment, was just beginning. Which is more damning, serving an evil regime out of misguided belief or using its power for personal profit? Share your thoughts on what constitutes the greater betrayal in the comments. While she was playing the part of a secret envoy for the Reich, Coco Chanel was simultaneously waging another, far more personal campaign. This was a war not for geopolitical advantage, but for money and revenge. Its target was the source of her greatest wealth and her deepest resentment, the ownership of Parfum Chanel and its crown jewel, No. 5. She had never forgiven herself for signing away 70% of the company to the Wertheimer brothers back in 1924. Now, with the Nazis in control of Paris, she saw a golden opportunity to correct what she considered a historic injustice. The Nazis' Aryanization laws were a perfect tool. These laws were designed to systematically strip Jewish citizens of their assets, their businesses, and ultimately their lives. For most, they were a sentence of ruin and death. For Coco Chanel, they were a business strategy. In 1941, she wrote a series of official letters to the German authorities. In cold, legalistic prose, she petitioned for the full ownership of Parfum Chanel to be transferred to her. Her argument was simple and monstrous. The company was Jewish property, and as an Aryan businesswoman, she was entitled to claim it. She was in effect attempting to use the mechanisms of the Holocaust for a hostile takeover. It was perhaps the most cynical act of her life, a direct attempt to profit from the persecution that would lead millions to the gas chambers. She was not just a passive beneficiary of the new racist laws, she was an active participant, a petitioner demanding her share of the spoils. But the Wertheimer brothers were as shrewd in business as she was in design. They had seen the storm coming. Long before the German invasion in 1940, they had fled France for the safety of the United States of America. And before they left, they had made a brilliant countermove. They legally transferred their ownership of the company to a non-Jewish French businessman and airplane manufacturer named Félix Amiot. Amiot was a friend, a trusted ally who agreed to hold the company in his name until the war was over. On paper, Parfum Chanel was now an Aryan company. When Chanel's petition arrived, the German authorities investigated. They found that the company was, according to their own twisted laws, legitimately owned by a Christian Frenchman. Her request was denied. She had been outmaneuvered. Her attempt to wield the power of the Nazi state as her personal corporate raiding firm had failed. Her rage was immense. For the rest of the occupation, she continued to use her connections to harass the company, to disrupt its operations, to try and find some legal loophole that would deliver it into her hands. She even tried to produce and sell her own line of Chanel perfumes in defiance of the legal ownership. This episode lays bare the core of her collaboration. It was not driven by a deep-seated fascist ideology, though she was certainly comfortable with its anti-Semitic tenets. It was driven by a bottomless, all-consuming greed and a pathological need to win at any cost. For some, war was a tragedy that brought out the best in them, a call to heroism and self-sacrifice. For Coco Chanel, it was simply a different kind of market, one where the rules had changed and the tools of genocide were just another form of leverage in a business negotiation. Her failure to capture the company was a bitter pill, but as the war drew to a close, she would soon face a much more immediate threat, one that concerned not her fortune, but her life. The bells of liberation rang across Paris in August of 1944. The city erupted in a joyous, chaotic celebration as German forces retreated and Allied and Free French soldiers marched down the Champs-Élysées. But alongside the euphoria was a current of rage. For 4 years, Parisians had lived under the heel of the occupier, and now it was time to settle scores. The épuration, the purge of collaborators, began. It was often brutal and summary. Women accused of collaboration horizontal, of sleeping with the enemy, were dragged into the streets, their heads shaved in public rituals of humiliation. Men who had worked for the Germans were arrested, tried by makeshift courts, and sometimes executed on the spot. In this atmosphere of vengeance, a figure like Coco Chanel, who had lived in opulent comfort at the Ritz, the German headquarters, on the arm of a high-ranking Abwehr officer, was a prime target. The reckoning was not long in coming. Shortly after the liberation, members of the French forces of the interior, the armed wing of the resistance, arrived at the Ritz. They did not come for a fitting. They came to arrest Mademoiselle Chanel. She was taken from her luxurious suite and escorted to a detention center for interrogation. The evidence against her was overwhelming. Her relationship with Dinklage was public knowledge. Her attempt to seize the Wertheimer business was documented. Her mission to Madrid, though secret, was known to Allied intelligence. She faced a future of public disgrace, a prison sentence, or even a firing squad. She was questioned for several hours. The details of that interrogation remain a mystery. And then something extraordinary happened. Coco Chanel, the suspected Nazi spy, was released without charge. She walked out of the detention center and returned to her suite at the Ritz as if nothing had happened. How? Why? The mystery of her release has fueled speculation for decades. The most persistent legend, one she herself helped to cultivate, is that she gave her interrogators a single instruction: tell your leader to make one phone call. The call, the story goes, was to be made to Winston Churchill, now the celebrated Prime Minister of a victorious Great Britain. Did Churchill intervene? Did the leader of the Allied cause make a secret call to protect a Nazi agent? It seems unthinkable, yet the theory is not without a certain dark logic. A public trial of Coco Chanel would have been a sensation. She would have been forced to reveal everything about her wartime activities, including her Abwehr missions and her powerful contacts. And those contacts reached into the highest levels of British society, including the royal family. A trial could have exposed the deep well of pro-Nazi sympathy that existed among the British elite before the war, embarrassing the new government and tarnishing the victory. Perhaps Churchill decided it was better to let one collaborator go free than to risk a scandal that could destabilize his country's political landscape. There is no definitive proof of the call, no record of it exists, but her release remains a stark anomaly in a period of swift and often merciless justice. While the poet Robert Brasillach was executed for his collaborationist writings and the industrialist Louis Renault died in prison, Chanel, an active agent of the enemy, walked free. She had played her final card, a trump card from a previous life, a connection forged over brandy 2 decades earlier. Justice, it seemed, was not blind, it was merely susceptible to influence. She had survived, but Paris was no longer safe for her. Her name was now poison. She packed her bags, left the Ritz, and fled, beginning a long exile from the city she had once ruled as its undisputed queen. Her exile was not spent in poverty or disgrace, but in the serene luxury of Switzerland. For nearly a decade, she lived a quiet, comfortable life near Lausanne, overlooking the tranquil waters of Lake Geneva. She watched from afar as a new fashion deity rose to rule Paris. Christian Dior, with his new look, celebrated a return to extravagant femininity. His designs featured wasp-waisted jackets, padded hips, and voluminous ankle-length skirts that consumed yards of fabric. It was everything Chanel despised. She saw it as a step backward, a new cage for the women she had fought to liberate. "Dior doesn't dress women," she sneered. "He upholsters them." For years, she nursed her bitterness and her ambition. The world of fashion thought she was a relic, a ghost from a bygone era. But at the age of 71, an age when most are content with retirement and memories, Coco Chanel decided it was time for a comeback. She would return to Paris and reclaim her throne. But to launch a new couture house required a fortune, and while she was wealthy, she lacked the capital for such a massive undertaking. And so, in the most audacious and ironic twist of her entire life, she turned for financing to the one man she had tried to destroy, Pierre Wertheimer. Why would he agree? Why would the Jewish businessman she had tried to dispossess using Nazi laws now fund her return to glory? The answer was not forgiveness. It was business. The Wertheimer family still owned the name Chanel, and while the couturier was in exile, the perfume was not. Chanel No. 5 remained a global bestseller, a cash cow of epic proportions. Pierre Wertheimer made a cold, pragmatic calculation. A revitalized Chanel couture house, even if it lost money, would be a priceless marketing tool for the perfumes. It would bring the name back into the headlines, restoring its glamour and prestige. He offered her a deal that was both a lifeline and a final, subtle revenge. He would fund everything. In return, he would acquire the rights to her name for all products, not just perfume. She accepted. She had no other choice. It was a devil's bargain between a collaborator and her intended victim, a pact sealed not with a handshake, but with a shared understanding of the color of money. In 1954, the stage was set for the return of the Queen. The fashion world held its breath. The collection was a disaster. The French press, which had not forgotten her wartime activities, was merciless. They called her designs recycled, old-fashioned, a pathetic attempt to relive past glories. The show was declared a fiasco. It seemed Chanel's career was well and truly over. But then across the Atlantic, a different story unfolded. The American press, less concerned with the politics of the French occupation and more impressed by the sheer wearability and modern elegance of her clothes, loved the collection. Life magazine praised her designs as revolutionary. The United States of America, the country that had liberated her city, now resurrected her career. American buyers placed massive orders. American women fell in love with her easy, comfortable chic all over again. The comeback, financed by the man she tried to ruin and saved by the country that defeated her Nazi patrons, was a resounding success. Coco Chanel was back. More powerful, more iconic, and more untouchable than ever before. Was this a story of redemption, or was it a chilling testament to the world's willingness to forget, to forgive anything in the name of style and commerce? Given their history, was the alliance between Chanel and Wertheimer a masterful act of pragmatism or a deeply unsettling moral compromise? Let us know which word you would choose in the comments. Her return to the pinnacle of fashion in the 1950s and 60s was more than a comeback. It was the beginning of her second reign, a period in which she would create the pieces that would make her immortal. This was the era of the Chanel tweed suit. It was the antithesis of Dior's new look, a symbol of relaxed, modern elegance. With its boxy, braid-trimmed jacket and easy-fitting skirt, it was designed for a woman who moved, who worked, who lived. It became the unofficial uniform of a new generation of powerful women, from Jackie Kennedy to Grace Kelly. Then came the 2.55 quilted bag, named for its creation date in February 1955. With its signature chain strap, It was revolutionary for a simple reason: it freed a woman's hands. Like all her great innovations, it was born from a practical need, a gesture of liberation. She was not just creating clothes and accessories, she was codifying a new language of female power, one that spoke of comfort, practicality, and understated confidence. But as she was building this new, unassailable legacy in fashion, she was simultaneously constructing something else, an impenetrable wall of silence around her past. The creation of the Chanel myth was as meticulous and brilliantly executed as the creation of a couture jacket. She became the master of her own narrative. In countless interviews, she spun the tale of the plucky orphan, the self-made woman who fought her way to the top against all odds, the lonely genius who sacrificed personal happiness for her art. It was a compelling story, and it was largely true, but it was a story with a gaping 15-year hole in the middle. The war years was simply erased. Any journalist who dared to broach the subject of the occupation was met with a terrifying, icy fury. The interview would be terminated. The journalist would be blacklisted. Access to the Chanel empire would be permanently revoked. The fashion press, which depended on her for advertising revenue and for the glamour she bestowed upon their pages, quickly learned to play by her rules. They became her willing accomplices in this grand act of historical revisionism. The world, it seemed, was more than happy to accept the beautiful myth over the ugly truth. It was easier to celebrate the feminist icon than to grapple with the collaborator. It was more profitable to sell the legend of the chic innovator than to investigate the Nazi agent. She controlled her history as rigidly as she controlled the cut of a sleeve. She understood that memory is malleable and that history is often written by those with the best public relations. She sold the world a legend so elegant, no one dared to check the label for its origin. She surrounded herself with a new court of admirers, writers, and artists who helped polish her legend. She became an oracle, dispensing witty, cruel, and unforgettable aphorisms on life, love, and style. A girl should be two things: classy and fabulous. In order to be irreplaceable, one must always be different. These quotes became part of the global lexicon, further cementing her image as a timeless arbiter of taste and wisdom. Her wartime treachery was not forgotten. It was deliberately and systematically buried under layers of tweed, pearls, and perfume, a dark secret hidden in the lining of a billion-dollar empire. The conspiracy of silence was her final and perhaps greatest creation. But behind the formidable public facade, behind the wall of silence and the carefully crafted legend, the final years of Coco Chanel's life were a study in gilded desolation. Her triumph was complete, her fame absolute, her wealth unimaginable. Yet she lived and died in a state of profound, soul-crushing loneliness. Her home remained the Hotel Ritz, the very place that had been her sanctuary and her command center during the occupation. The opulent suite that had once hosted her Nazi lover now became her luxurious prison, a place haunted by the ghosts of a past she refused to acknowledge but could never escape. She became a tyrant, a creature of rigid habits and explosive rages. Her employees lived in fear of her sharp tongue and her impossible standards. She was demanding, paranoid, and often cruel, lashing out at a world she felt had never truly understood her. Her wit, once a dazzling social tool, now curdled into a bitter, defensive weapon. "Don't spend time beating on a wall," she once said, hoping to transform it into a door. In her old age, it seemed she was surrounded by walls of her own making. She had sacrificed everything for her work, for her independence, but in the end, she had only her work to keep her company. She had no husband, no children, only a small, pampered dog. She continued to work with a feverish intensity, sketching, fitting, and overseeing every detail of her collections until the very end. Work was her only refuge, the only place where she still felt in complete control. Her health began to fail. She grew frail, her body racked by arthritis, her mind clouded by a growing dependence on morphine to ease her physical and perhaps psychic pain. Her nights were long and sleepless. Her days were a relentless cycle of work, followed by a solitary return to her Ritz apartment. She was an icon to millions, a name synonymous with timeless elegance, but in her private reality, she was a lonely old woman surrounded by immense wealth but starved of genuine human connection. On Sunday, January 10th, 1971, after returning from a day of work on her new collection, she died quietly in her bed at the Ritz. She was 87 years old. The news of her death sparked a global outpouring of grief. The world mourned the passing of a legend, the queen of fashion, the woman who had defined 20th century style. Her funeral was a grand affair, attended by the titans of the fashion world. The obituaries were glowing tributes, recounting the now familiar myth of the orphan who conquered Paris. Her dark secret, it seemed, had gone to the grave with her. Her story was complete, sealed, and ready to be placed in the pantheon of cultural saints. But history is a patient hunter. The secrets she had so carefully buried were not in a grave. They were in archives, filed away in dusty boxes in Paris, Berlin, and London, waiting for the locks to turn and for the judgment of a future she could no longer control. Decades passed. The House of Chanel, under the creative direction of Karl Lagerfeld, grew from a fashion powerhouse into a global luxury supernova, a multi-billion-dollar empire built on the foundation of her myth. The legend of Coco Chanel was more powerful than ever, carved in the cultural granite of the modern world. But slowly, quietly, the locks on the archives began to turn. In France, Germany, and Britain, governments began declassifying their wartime intelligence files. Historians and journalists, digging through mountains of yellowed documents, began to find fragments of another story, a story that had been systematically suppressed for half a century. The whispers grew louder. Rumors of her collaboration, once dismissed as gossip, began to be substantiated by official records. Then in 2011, the whispers became a roar. The American journalist Hal Vaughan published a book titled Sleeping with the Enemy: Coco Chanel's Secret War. It was a journalistic bombshell. Vaughan laid out the evidence, piece by damning piece, not as speculation, but as documented fact. He cited a French police report from 1944 detailing her role as an Abwehr agent. He produced German intelligence documents that listed her by her agent number, F7124, and her codename, Westminster. He detailed the specifics of Operation Modellhut, cross-referencing German and British archives. The evidence was irrefutable. The myth shattered. The global reaction was one of shock and fascination. The story was everywhere. The House of Chanel, which had for decades denied or deflected any questions about its founder's past, was forced to confront the undeniable. Their response was a masterpiece of corporate damage control, carefully worded statements acknowledging that Chanel had a relationship with a German aristocrat during the war, but questioning the extent of her involvement as an agent. They sought to cast doubt, to create ambiguity where the documents were clear. But the truth was out. The woman who had given the world the little black dress had also worn the invisible uniform of the Third Reich. Her story was no longer a simple narrative of triumph. It was a complex and disturbing tale of moral compromise and betrayal. The world was left with an impossible question. How do we reconcile the two Chanels? The revolutionary designer who empowered women and the Nazi collaborator who served a regime that murdered millions? Can you wear her designs, knowing the hands that created them served the enemy? Does genius redeem betrayal? Her legacy is now forever bifurcated, a testament to the fact that the most elegant surfaces can hide the darkest depths. The final battle for her soul began only after her death, and it is a battle that continues to this day in every museum exhibit, in every biography, in every purchase of a bottle of No. 5. After all the revelations, the Chanel brand did not collapse. It became more powerful, more desirable than ever. Millions of people knowingly buy her products, separating the timeless art from the tainted artist. Is this proof that beauty transcends morality, or is it a sign of a world that has learned to look away? Now you have heard the evidence. the two sides of a singular, brilliant, and compromised soul. The choice of how to remember her falls to you. So, tell us, what is your verdict on her legacy? Do you choose to see the revolutionary artist, or do you see the unforgivable traitor? Post your judgment in the comments. History is listening.